Morning, folks. Real pleasure to have Sarah Nicastro today. She is Vice President of Customer Advocacy. I love that title, by the way, at IFS. Sarah, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I know I've dealt with you quite a bit. Impressive background. We're going to talk a lot about customer service today. But tell us about what you do and also about IFS. You know, people know IFS as an ERP vendor, but frankly, it's a pretty big player in customer service, field service, and so on. So tell us about both.
Yeah, well, hi, Vinnie. Thank you for having me. Appreciate the invitation. Happy to be here. So yes, I'm the Vice President of Customer Advocacy, and I also created a thought leadership platform in partnership with IFS called Future of Field Service. That was born actually out of my past. My history in this space is as a journalist. So I was the editor-in-chief of a North American publication called Field Technologies that covers field service and a lot of the adjacent areas. I was there for about 12 years before joining IFS and really bringing some of that thought leadership into the organization in the service space. To your point, IFS has a very deep, rich history in the ERP side of the business, but it is a very strong player in service as well. That was one of the things that was really appealing to me about joining the company and being able to be a part of its growth in service. IFS actually has been a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for Field Service Management for 6 years. So it's got its start in service quite a while ago. I would say in the last few years, we've really doubled down and invested heavily in making service a key focus for the business. And I've been thrilled to be a part of that. In my role, I engage heavily with IFS customers and with other industry leading service organizations and talk with them a lot about their challenges, their objectives, how they're innovating, what they're working on. And then I take those conversations and turn them both into content via Future of Field Service, and then also use that as a basis for community and building collective knowledge through the Customer Advocacy program.
Fantastic. So let's talk about last year, 2020. I started a series called Acrobatics During the Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And for most of 2020, I was all excited about how people were just, obviously the healthcare heroics, the last mile delivery heroics. Service seemed to be like, heroic is probably the best term, right? That's why I call it acrobatics. The pandemic hasn't ended. This year, I'm seeing a lot more shoddy service. Labor shortages, supply chain issues are partly to blame, but you spend your life watching over services. So tell me, is the glass half full? Are you optimistic, or are we seeing a secular decline?
So I am optimistic. I think that we need to really, focus on our understanding of what these industries and these organizations have gone through, so you mentioned a couple of those factors, but, I don't think that this is a situation where service is forever going to be diminished or companies are looking for a way to, move backwards in the quality that they're providing or those types of things. I think, first of all, the market will demand that we get back to the level we were at pre-pandemic and progress beyond that, right? I mean, that's just the nature of customer expectations, and these companies will be forced to, acknowledge and grapple with that fact. But I think, as consumers of different services, and whether that's utilities, whether that's healthcare, whether that's the hospitality industry, whether that's, residential services, whatever those look like. I mean, these businesses have gone through immense challenges, just as we all have as human beings, right? And it's just going to take some time, I think, to navigate those circumstances and fully recover. To your point, we're still in the midst of the pandemic. It's not over. I think everyone is doing their best to work through it and work with the the criteria and the resources that they have. And, we all just need to be a little bit patient and empathetic.
So I've been using the term COVID copouts and BREXIT copouts.
Mhm.
Well, maybe I need to be a little more patient. But on the
I,
positive
I
side,
think so. I think so. I think that, or maybe I'm just a little too rosy, but that's not really my nature. So I don't think that's the case. I think that, maybe it's the good fortune I've had to have a lot of conversations with people, leading in services through this situation. But I think everyone is doing their best. And I think there are some real situational factors that are making things incredibly difficult. But I do think that by will or by force, by way of customer expectations, we'll come back out of that.
well, let's talk about the positive side. I have seen, not so much in the consumer world, but more in the enterprise world, the industrial world, a lot of movement towards servitization, outcome-based contracts. I mean, that's seismic changes going on in many industries, right? Other than in technology. I mean, funny thing is,
Mhm.
technology kind of innovated and moved from licensing to subscriptions, but they haven't made the movement to outcome-based stuff. But a lot of asset-intensive industries are doing some really creative stuff around servitization and so on. Tell us what you're seeing from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, servitization and outcomes-based service are terms that get used interchangeably quite a bit. And I think that in my opinion, at least, or how I define these things, the idea here is that customers and consumers of things are wanting to focus more on value and outcomes and less on what it is that they are purchasing. Okay, and so whether that is a product manufacturer looking at how to provide those outcomes which combine both their product and services, that's what I would call servitization, or whether it's different types of service providers looking to morph from providing transactional break fix type services to delivering outcomes. It's a huge shift. And I think it's an area of immense opportunity. I think that most organizations are still in the pretty early stages of that journey, at least what it can look like. To your point, there seems to be kind of a natural evolution of, okay, we are a product manufacturer, but we know that service is more important. So let's focus a little bit more on that. Okay, we'll add contracts, right? And then it's, okay, let's look at if our customers are interested in purchasing through an as a service model, et cetera. So there's almost these phases that companies go through. But I think that we land at the point at which you are delivering peace of mind for your customers. You're guaranteeing some sort of outcome, some sort of knowledge, some sort of powerful trusted advisor type relationship that they would have a hard time getting somewhere else. That is sort of the key that we're working towards. And I think that, journalists that cover this space, vendors that provide technology that enable these transformations tend to get a little bit ahead of the industry itself, and maybe minimize the layers of complexity that go into really transforming a business to deliver outcomes. And so, that's what kind of causes this lag or this question in your mind of, are we really going to reach this point, right? I think we will. I think, again, it's going to be based largely on customer demands and expectations, and it takes some time for businesses to orient themselves to be able to provide real outcomes.
To your point about complexity, I mean, certainly in the asset-intensive industries, we're seeing digital twins and a lot of IoT, and then that makes for a lot more complicated contract management if it's outcome-based and so on. So there are layers of technology that They certainly cannot buy from outside. They're having to custom build it or integrate multiple tools and so on. So yes, no question.
Yeah, there's layers with the technology. And then if you take it a step back, I mean, it's a different value proposition, right? And so there's layers around actually changing the way your business is structured to, maybe traditionally manufacture and deliver products versus products being a part of the outcome, right? So there's some changes in business structure, business model. There's changes in the go-to-market strategy and how you equip your sales force to be able to sell that value and that different value proposition, changes in service delivery, along with the changes in technology that are what underpin and enable you to have the insights and react the way you need to deliver or guarantee outcomes. So that's what I mean. There's a lot to it when you start digging in, that just takes some time to really sort through.
So service, obviously you got to talk about labor, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a book about 5 years ago about automation. So I studied a lot of Bureau of Labor Statistics data and so on for that. And back then there was 6 million unfilled jobs. And I blamed a little bit on the tendency of parents and young people to go into white collar jobs, and there were plenty of trade jobs. Trade school would have been enough, blue collar jobs needed, didn't really need a 4-year degree and so on, right? Now we're seeing another layer of people are retiring early, people don't want to go back to work, could be the stimulus checks or whatever, right? I mean, now there are 10 million jobs open.
Mm-hmm.
I'm almost at this point pessimistic that as a society, we just are giving up on work. I don't think so, but you just get the feeling people are like prioritizing other things, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you see, how are people coping with the labor shortage issue?
So again, I mean, there's layers to this. And I think one of the things that's important to point out about the whole labor conversation is that it too is evolving on pace with the move toward delivering outcomes, right? So if you think about in that journey to delivering outcomes, what is the role of the frontline worker, right? That role is shifting. It's shifting from being more of a mechanical type worker to more of a knowledge worker, more of a relationship builder in a lot of instances, right? And so this very real challenge is compounded by the fact that, depending on the maturity of your organization on that journey, what you need from these folks is changing or about to change, right? But this is a really big challenge to address. I think companies need to certainly look at how they're recruiting and hiring. I would say that by and large, a lot of the organizations I talk with that are struggling with this, and this isn't to detract from the fact that there is a real lack of talent to be had. Okay, so there's no way to just manufacture, more of those people that are ready and willing. So we need to focus on controlling the controllables, right? So a lot of these organizations are accustomed to recruiting and hiring based on prior experience. And the reality is that's becoming impossible to do, right? So the industry needs to take a more proactive approach and start shifting the mindset to how do you nurture your future workforce, right? So we see companies that are partnering with high schools, trade schools, universities, the military, different, depending on what your criteria would be to be able to do the job, looking for ways to align with different organizations to create a funnel of your own experience, right? These people aren't just going to land in your lap with 5 years of prior work experience. So we need to really take a more proactive approach. I think step 2 is to understand that there are elements that are important to the younger generation of workforce that companies may not be accustomed to prioritizing or really focusing on and playing up in the recruiting process. So things like, company culture and career progression, employee experience. I mean, those are things that, in some industries, may be very soft and almost laughable, but they are becoming very real and very, very important. So looking at what are those experiences like in your company, and how are you communicating them in the hiring process is important. And then, number three is the role of technology, right? So as huge amounts of workers leave and these new, less experienced folks come in, how are we capturing and transferring that knowledge? How are we making sure that we're retaining some of the insights that those super experienced and tenured technicians have gained? What role could technologies like augmented reality play in training up those new technicians and supporting them while they build that experience? And what is the day-to-day technological experience like for the technicians? Is it smooth? Is it cohesive? Is it helping equip them to do the job well out of the gate? Or is it something that is making their day-to-day clunky and painful and arduous? So those are, I think, three important areas to be examining.
The technology part you mentioned, using augmented reality. I talked to a couple of companies when I was doing the interview last year. And one of them said, we've taken our older techs and moved them into a call center, or actually from home. And they were doing augmented reality support of the younger crowd that was going out and doing the field services. So that became a training opportunity in addition to actually doing live support. So yeah, if you're creative, you can start to do things like that. And you mentioned, apprenticeships. My God, Europe has done that for so long. Other countries have done. We've got it's a lost art in the US. So hopefully we'll pick it back up, operate more with the trade schools and so on, and community colleges, and start.
There's a couple companies I've interviewed recently for the podcast. Bureau Veritas is one. Tetra Pak is another that are doing some really cool things around preparing for the future of work, and how are they building their talent pool? How are they being proactive? How are they elevating awareness of the industries and these roles in general? So not just the selfish interest of filling X positions, but how do we make sure that the younger generation knows that there's a lot of career opportunity in these spaces that they should be considering, in addition to some of the other every kid when they're little says, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a teacher. You don't necessarily hear 5-year-olds saying, I want to be a field technician, unless it's something that they have seen in their own family. So creating an awareness that there's a lot of career opportunity in services is important.
So let's go back to the role of the customer. You and I have done recent trips, and we've exchanged messages on our experiences. Mine was tough, right? What I said was, look, every aspect of airport, hotel, rental car, dining, if I were to quantify it, has dropped 30 to 40% in quality. And your feedback was much more on, you thought customers have become much more demanding, much more unruly. They've been caged up, and so now they're out, and so their behavior is part of the problem. And I hadn't thought of that till I heard you say it. Where does this settle? Because I worry that the travel industry, hospitality business, is saying, look, 2020 was a wash for us. We're going to have to make money somewhere. And that attitude is like, put up with us for the next year or two. And I don't think people are going to put up with that level of drop, right? So where do you think that's going to settle at?
Yeah, so I recently took a family trip. So the travel that I recently did was personal travel, not professional travel. It was the first time that I had flown since COVID began. And I think what took me aback is just the palpable stress level of fellow travelers. So, where you used to see people holding doors or smiling and saying hi, or, helping someone that, dropped something in the airport, there was none of that. And there was almost just a lot of, I don't want to say rudeness, that might be too strong of a word, but, some judgment, some, just negativity really. And I wasn't prepared for that. And I think that if you think about the feeling of that, stress on the service workers, that's a tough job, right? For the flight attendant to provide this good experience when everyone on the airplane is, on the verge of a of a meltdown or an outburst or what have you. So I think there is kind of a snowball effect of, maybe the travelers' stress fueling the stress of the workforce. Again, I think we do need to all try and be empathetic. I mean, service workers are people too. This pandemic has probably impacted them in its own ways in their lives. And that's not an excuse, but it is a reality, right? And so, I mean, there's just an element of patience that I think is necessary. The other thing is, in hospitality specifically, I mean, service workers are, underpaid, right? And so I think this is almost a tipping point of them demanding better and demanding, more fair compensation for the value they're providing. And that's a real thing as well. They deserve that. So that's something that the industry needs to grapple with. I'm not sure where we'll go ahead.
Let me just give you a little pushback on that, right? So on a couple of flights, flight attendants would tap your shoulder if your mask was down for even taking a sip or taking a bite if you were eating something. And I said, there's something wrong with this when they should be talking about, hey, we have new HIPAA filters. The air on air is cleaner than in your house, what you used to have in your office and so on. None of the announcements mentioned that, right? Or they could have said, look, this plane has gone through a deep cleaning. Since COVID, every plane goes through deep cleaning. Well, none of that comfort. It was just like the flight attendants had become the enforcers rather than service providers. So I would think a little bit of a change in attitude where they're more empathetic that people are stressed out and make them feel comfortable with all the technology they've been putting in. That is not happening enough. So, or like a rental car, right? Both ways, when I rented a car, the driver was rude, just mask on, mask on, mask on. He didn't help anybody with their bags, right? And so I was like, okay, I mean, that's what I mean by the service level has just dropped so much. That almost seems to add to the customer stress. I hear saying they should be nice to each other. We should be nice to each other. We're not, right? But I think I'm noticing in a number of areas, like I've heard about FedEx from several people, there is no follow through. If there's a problem, it's almost impossible to get any kind of resolution, right? It's broken down in some areas where I think corporations are if not as much to blame, are certainly to blame.
Yeah. So it's interesting you bring up the airline announcement and the filter. So of 3 flights, we did get that message on one. And there were varying levels of comfort and understanding coming from those folks. I think the thing that we have to remember as travelers or consumers is, it's easy then to take the frustration with what is the new normal or what is the service experience out on them. But ultimately, they're not making these decisions. They're not choosing to be in a role where they're trying to enforce, most of them probably don't like that, right? It's hard and stressful. So, I guess I just look at it more from the human perspective of how do we all help each other through this. I think, from the corporate perspective and what are the business decisions being made and how do companies address this, that's where we need to reconcile some of the, the new realities, right? So masks are important and they protect people. And so how do you enforce that without changing the role that used to be a service provider into just a police officer of sorts, right? And that's a real, that's a real thing. And it's always changing. I mean, that's the other layer of this that I think is really difficult for companies to react adeptly enough to always protect the individual service experience, is that the criteria can be different day to day. So we've gone through periods where the mandates are one thing and then there's something else and then they're back to this. And so to react to that quickly enough at a global level where every individual, customer experience is protected is probably nearly impossible. But certainly they need to do their best, right? And do their best to uphold an acceptable level of service.
Well, let's be positive, right? You talk to people at Peloton and Southwest and some very, very paragon of services, right? And they've done pretty well in the last year and a half, right? So tell us, AT&T, a few other customers that you talked to. Tell us what you're hearing from them in terms of service.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all making their way through, right? I mean, I think it's been super challenging year for everyone. I think that the companies that are navigating this the best, it really comes down to prioritizing empathy, right? So with their employees and with their customers, and then reacting as quickly as possible and relying on or putting in place technology, since the beginning of this to help you increase that pace, right? So, I think there are organizations that at the start of this were really glad they had certain technologies in place that they could fall back on and be able to, examine data, at closer intervals and make faster business decisions and enact change faster and, be very adept in response. And then there are others who realized how critically important it is to have those capabilities that have, acted fast to put those things in place. So, I think putting yourself in a more agile mindset, right? And being able to have a plan, but know that the factors of this are always changing. And so you have to be flexible in that plan. You have to be, reviewing regularly, making changes and doing your best to, just stay up to speed and protect that customer experience.
Well, you've been doing this for almost 2 decades, right? So look ahead. Tell us, let's end on a positive note. What excites you?
There's so much. I mean, I am probably kind of a nerd about these things just because I have the really unique opportunity to talk to business leaders day in and day out about, how they're navigating this. COVID is a big part of the discussion, but we will get past it, I believe. And, the potential that's there for evolution and innovation is huge. I think we talked about the move toward outcomes. That's something that I'm very excited about because, as I said, I think we've really just sort of scratched the surface of what's possible. The evolution that leads to in terms of how we use technology and what sales and service roles look like and, what the customer experience will be like is all really exciting to me. There's a whole new wave, I believe, of digital experiences that, will unfold in terms of how a workforce is equipped and enabled and how customers can interact with different brands, how they can receive service, all sorts of different things. And the other area I've been having a lot of conversations about recently is sustainability and how that intersects with service and both, the opportunity that it brings to focus more on that area, which is a very important one, and to, make some meaningful change, but also as it relates to that being a potential for service growth, right? So providing services around sustainability, I think will be a growing area. So there are a lot of positive things on the horizon.
Yeah. And, I'm a geek like you, so all the new technologies that just, everything from digital twins to the IoT to AI, augmented reality, and lots to
Yeah,
look
I
forward to.
think from a technology perspective, I think what is most compelling is how a lot of those things start to come together better, right? So, the whole idea of delivering outcomes in my mind is related to, I always say, not minimizing complexity, because you can't really minimize it, but you have to master it. So your customers don't care how complicated it is to provide X outcome, right? They just want the outcome. And so all of the ways that technology can help master the complexity on the back end to be able to provide that seamless experience to the customer is really cool, but it takes, better integration of all of these different cutting edge things into a very cohesive, usable platform so that it isn't disconnected and disjointed, and there aren't failure points that will prevent that customer experience from coming off the way you want it to. So I think there's a lot of evolution on the technology side as well that will make for a lot more simplicity.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. You're always so exuberant and bubbly. Even if you have a nasty service experience, I can call you and you'll make me feel good. So
yeah. I mean, I do get angry sometimes. There are experiences that I think are unacceptable, but I also think, we have to look at our experiences in the context of what all is going on. I mean, we all have high expectations, but in certain situations we need to make accommodations for, the context. And then in certain situations you can objectively say, that was bad, it's unacceptable, and, let's not do it again. But happy to be here, Vinnie, and thank you very much for having me.
thank you, Sarah.